I'm going to present the fourth speaker. I'm very excited. It's Dr. Mohammad Afsar. He obtained his Bachelor in Pharmacy and Master's in Pharmaceutical Technology from the Faculty of Pharmacy at the University of Dhaka. After working at Incepta Pharmaceuticals for several years, he moved to US and received his PhD from Texas Tech University in 2014. Following graduation, Dr. Afsar joined the US FDA as a clinical pharmacology reviewer, where he contributed in reviewing drugs and biological development programs. He has also developed multiple guidance and policies for the FDA. His notable contribution includes development of FDA guidance on biosimilar insulin products, orally inhaled drug products, and ocular or nasal spray suspension products. During his 6-year tenure at FDA, he received 13 awards as recognition for his scientific contribution to US public health. Earlier this year, Dr. Afsar joined AstraZeneca as the Director for Global Regulatory Strategy within the Biopharmaceuticals R&D. So Dr. Afsar, your time starts now. We will give you another reminder once it has hit the 10-minute mark. So thank you, Dr. Afsar.
Right, cool. Thanks for the kind introduction. I feel privileged actually to be here among all these highly accomplished individuals who are performing outstandingly in the pharma industry. Just to make sure, are you able to see my screen? Okay, cool.
Yes, we are.
Cool. So I'm going to talk about career in regulatory science. And let me minimize this real quick. Career and regulatory science within pharma industry, and I'm going to give you a bird's eye view. And I would also like to thank our previous two speakers who laid out the foundation and the background for my talk, because they sort of outlined the transition that can take place from academia to industry and give an understanding of the industry structure in general. But my focus and talk of my focus will be strictly towards regulatory science career. One disclaimer, the content of this presentation is my personal opinion. It has nothing to do with AstraZeneca. And the career perspective I'm going to be sharing would be more relevant towards career in North America and Europe, because, you know, regulatory science career is really tailored to that particular region in the world. And also the career perspective will be somewhat more relevant to brand pharmaceutical companies who develop new drug products, where the regulatory strategist role is more comprehensive and robust. So let's go ahead. I will try to answer these 4 questions in my presentation. What is regulatory science? And here I'll also talk about what is the function of a regulatory scientist? What do they do? Why regulatory science as a career? And then who are the regulatory scientists currently playing in the field? And how to become a regulatory scientist? And because of the time limitation, this is no way a very comprehensive discussion about all these questions, but I hope and anticipate at the end of my presentation, the audience will have some understanding on the answer of these questions. So what is regulatory science? The way FDA defines it is the science of developing new tools, standards, and approaches to assess the efficacy, safety, quality, and performance of all FDA-regulated products. So FDA sees regulatory science as a science to assess drug development program. Now, from a functional perspective, when someone is working as a regulatory scientist in industry, so it is art and science of taking new medical and food products to market and keeping them on the market under constraints of a variety of laws and requirements. So you're doing science, but you're doing it in a legal framework. And the way I see it, my personal definition, the regulatory science in pharmaceuticals is the integration of science and regulation to develop, market, and maintain the life cycle of a safe and effective drug or biologic or any regulated product for an intended patient population. That's my definition within the pharma domain. So no matter how you define it, one thing you'll find common is that regulatory science is a combination of regulation and science, and hence the name is regulatory science. Now, in my next few slides, I'll try to explain more about the role of a regulatory scientist. And I think it's extremely important to understand the role of a particular discipline before we make a career choice. After you understand the role, that what you'll be doing actually, then you can, number one, make an informed judgment that whether this is the right fit for you. Does it fit your interest, your personal character and attribute? And number two, you can prepare yourself for that role. So that's why I'll spend some time in describing the role of a regulatory scientist in industry. Now, here's the thing. To describe the regulatory science role, one needs to understand the drug development program a little bit, at least some understanding needs to be there. Otherwise, it will be like explaining the role of a quarterback to someone who is not familiar with American football. So I tried to bring the gigantic drug development program into one slide. So excuse me, because I'll not be talking about a lot of things that also goes in. It'll be a very, very high level overview. So I see drug development in 3 stages. Okay, early stage, where a drug molecule is discovered, purified, characterized, all these mechanistic aspects are investigated, the pharmacology of it. The pre-formulation development takes place based on the physicochemical properties of the drug. The toxicology information is identified, like what is the maximum dose you can give, what's the maximum exposure that you can give. Some understanding comes from the toxicology studies. These are done in usually a monkey and rats. In some cases, some early phase PK study, pharmacokinetic study, healthy subject also takes place in early stage. Now, most of the cases, people who have PhD background, they start their career in early stage because this is the stage where you do the basic science, okay? Once the lead molecule is identified and then it is decided that the company will proceed with this molecule for further development, then it is transferred from early stage to late stage. And the people who work in the late stage more or less are different from the people who are working in early stage. There could be some overlap. So it's literally a transfer of the project from early to late. And in the late stage, the game is different. So here we are not trying to understand the science of the molecule and all those things. The objective is to bring this product to the market and make it available to the patient through approval from the regulatory agencies like FDA for America, EMA for Europe, or Health Canada. And so in the late stage, a lot of activities goes in, and I just highlighted a few, like CMC from manufacturing. A lot of activities goes in to manufacture the product, to get it ready for clinical trials and commercial launching. The pharmacokinetic, pharmacodynamic, the clinical pharmacology studies, those are done to understand the absorption, distribution, metabolism, elimination of the drug in human body. One of the very important questions is dose finding. Like, what would be the dose of the drug? Is it 1 milligram or 1,000 milligram? Is it once daily, twice daily, or once weekly, or even once monthly? So these questions are addressed in late stage. Also, a lot of other information is generated. For example, if the drug is metabolized by liver, what will be the dose if the patient has a liver disease? Similarly, what will be the dose if the patient has a kidney disease? Or what's the dose if the patient is obese, if the patient is elderly, or if the patient is taking another drug that at the same time taking this drug, will there be any interaction? So all these information are generated in the late stage drug development because these are very, very patient relevant information. And finally, the gigantic efficacy safety study, the phase 3 study that is done to establish the efficacy and safety in the intended patient population. So once all this information are generated, the package is developed, and we submit it to the health regulating agencies like FDA. And once they approve it, it comes to the market. And once it comes to the market, then the next stage begins, post-market, in terms of development. So all the activities for this approved market still goes on. There are a lot of regulations that needs to go through it. But from a development perspective, the post-marketing begins in terms of developing a new indication or a new patient population. For example, you got the drug approved in adult. Now you're seeking pediatric approval or in a new dosage form. So the program continues. The regulatory folks typically gets involved during the late stage drug development. I said typically because there are cases when the regulatory folks can involve in early stage as well. Those are case by case, but typically it's late stage and beyond. And the regulatory folks will stay with the program till the product is approved or marketed in any country. So the job of the regulatory scientist would be to advise each of these functional units who are generating all this data for the submission to FDA to make sure that the data are generated according to the regulation and according to the need or satisfy the need for approval. So it's a multifunctional collaborative effort, and I'll explain a little bit more in this slide. So if we consider this left side, this is happening when you are within the pharmaceutical company, okay? So the regulatory scientist works with all the other disciplines to make sure the information that is being generated, it's in agreement with what the regulatory agencies want to see. For example, Your ClinFarm team may say, hey, you know what, I don't want to do a separate study for hepatic impairment to understand what will be the dose for patients with liver disease. I want to do a modeling simulation, quantitative prediction, and address this information. Is it okay? Will FDA accept it? So a question will be posed to you. Now, you're not a clinical pharmacologist, you're not a modeler, but you have to know what modeling can do and what's the perception of the regulatory agencies based on modeling, and what modeling data will be needed to satisfy their requirements. Similarly, a statistician may say, this is our statistical plan. Is it okay? Will FDA accept it? Same is true. You're not a statistician, but you need to know the basic outline of what statistical analysis is important, what should be the statistical criteria, error protection and all this. I'm not going to go into detail of statistics, but one is true. Regulatory sciences has to have that understanding. Your clinical colleague will ask you about the inclusion-exclusion criteria, about the primary, secondary endpoints. So regulatory scientists need to know for that particular patient population, what are the really very relevant endpoints, what are the inclusion criteria that we need to come up with a product profile that will match our intended desire to have a product. Your CMC colleagues may say, hey, you know what, the clinical study we conducted with the formulation, now we have a different formulation. We have to make some change. How are you going to handle it? You have to advise. Your commercial marketing may say, we want to have this promotion in the claim in our promotion, in our TV ad. Is it okay? Does our data support it? Will FDA let us have this ad, have this claim in our promotion? So you have to understand what's the promotional regulatory requirement. How can you support that promotion from your clinical program? Or if you need to adjust your clinical program a little bit too. So this, you can understand, this is all about scientific interaction. You're not talking about regulatory within your company. You're talking about science. Now, the other part of the regulatory scientist is to talk to the regulatory agencies, FDA or EMA, because regulatory scientist is the only authorized person to talk to the regulatory agencies. Nobody else within the functional unit can talk to FDA or EMA. So that interaction, which is the red box here, this interaction is solely, more tailored towards a regulation. You need to understand what regulation, what are the framework you're going to use to convey the message that you're generating by working with your cross-functional discipline to satisfy the regulatory requirement. So that's why I say it's a role where you need to fit multiple piece of puzzles to come up with a story. You don't need to know how to do it, but you really need to know what to do it. And I define it as a jack of all trades, but master of regulatory. So why regulatory science as a career? I know in our first presentation, Dr. Nagesh just mentioned that the regulatory science is one of the areas where there are not many people around, not many people who can put the puzzles together and come up with a great development program. And every day you spend in regulatory, your value goes up proportionally. So the thing is, it's a very visible role. As you can imagine, you're working with multiple disciplines within the team. It has a high impact on the company. Every discipline has a high impact on the company. There's no question about that. But when you think about a company's ultimate objective, it is like you are launching a product in the market from a development perspective. And the regulatory would be one of those disciplines where almost very close to the approval process. The opportunity for a regulatory scientist is you can see it all because you're working with all the disciplines. You have a career stability relatively. One of the issues in career in North America or Europe is the job is being outsourced to outside Europe or North America. I do not anticipate that's happening in the regulatory area anytime soon. So from a career stability perspective, it's pretty good. It has a very good career growth like any other discipline within pharma. And you have a good consulting opportunity. There are many companies who do not have good regulatory scientists. They'll reach out to you and just to seek your advice that this is our idea. We want to develop a product like this. What should we do? And they will pay a lot of money just for 1 hour of telephone conversation. So I think the sky is the limit for a regulatory scientist. You could become a drug development leadership, take a drug development leadership role for sure. You could take a management role within the regulatory body, or you could transition to other disciplines as well, because you build the network by working with them. You understand their functionality to some extent. But if anyone wants to stay within regulatory, the career path is also pretty good. You could start as a regulatory scientist and gradually move up as a senior scientist, manager, senior manager, associate director, director, executive director, vice president. Some companies have senior vice president as well within regulatory. And beyond that, it is usually cross-functional, executive vice president, So they will be leading in charge of regulatory, clinical, ClinFarm, CMC, manufacturing, statistics, everything. So to get to there, one is to have a very good understanding for all other disciplines as well. And regulatory can give you that exposure as well. So that's a plus. Now, who are the regulatory scientists in general? You'll see people from all different backgrounds that come to regulatory. With PhDs, MDs, PharmDs, MBAs, any masters in science, lawyers, etc. So it's really a cross-functional team. And more than 90% of the people I know in regulatory, they started in some other discipline within the pharmaceutical industry, and then they gradually transition to regulatory. So it's a cross-functional interdisciplinary team, and that gives a unique strength because you see the perception from everybody else, how they look into the role and how they can implement. So that's a combination of the people that are currently working in regulatory. Now, how you can become a regulatory scientist? What are the desired skills? I don't think I need to go through these bullet points anymore because from my discussion, one should have the understanding that communication skill would be one of the very important aspects to become a regulatory scientist, because you're going to talk to a lot of people about and convey your perception on how the program should look like to satisfy the regulatory requirement. You need to have a very good interpersonal skill, a very good teamwork, comprehensive knowledge in regulation, and a good understanding of drug development. And so these are the desired skills. Now, how you can get into regulatory science. So as I mentioned, one way is to transition from other area of drug development and then to regulatory. So you could start in almost any discipline. For example, I started as a clinical pharmacology reviewer at FDA. So my background is clinical pharmacology, and then I made the transition to as a regulatory strategist at AstraZeneca. And before that, my academic training is all formulation, pharmacokinetics. So that's how I made the transition. But one can also start as a regulatory associate within a pharmaceutical company at an entry level. In that case, I think the requirement would be you need to have some academic training on regulatory. There are master's programs available in many universities. They provide masters in regulatory. That could be helpful in getting an entry-level position. I know our first speaker also mentioned that it could be a bit tricky to get into regulatory at the beginning. And one of the reasons is I highlighted here under challenges is because there is very limited academic training to become a regulatory scientist. So that's why getting into the regulatory is a bit trickier. There are master's programs that teach you regulations, but not the science part of it. So that's the advantage of someone with a microbiology background, because you have the science part already built into your profile. So if you could develop on the regulatory and the drug development understanding, so it could be a very good fit for regulatory down the road. And to mitigate this challenge, I mean, the lack of academic training could be like self-learning. There are publicly available FDA reviews or EMA reviews. If you read a few reviews for a particular indication, for example, diabetes, if you read reviews for a few products that are developed in diabetes, you'll have a very good idea that what are the things that are done and how the reviewers are looking into the studies that are conducted to develop a diabetes portfolio.
I'm really sorry I have to interrupt you. Your time is actually up. So
this is my last slide, so no worries.
Thank you.
So this is my last slide. And mitigation is, you could do a RAP certification as well. All right, so that's it. I think we're having a Q&A session down the road at the end of the presentation. I have this famous quote that I always carry in my heart: shame on the soldier who doesn't want to be a general. This is self-explanatory. I don't think I need to explain it anymore. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Abshar. That was such a nice presentation. And I hope that you enjoyed the session. And please, if you do, please join our ISBM Facebook group. And with that, I would like to end the session.